Hello everybody, Blackfate here with the fourth video in the optimal animation video series for Vermintide 2. Today we'll be covering Bardin, and we're going to start with the one-handed axe. Now this is the same one-handed axe that Saltspire has. Really good light attack pattern, just light attack everything. Use pushes and push stabs to get control during hordes, and you're going to have to dodge dance to stay alive, more or less. Charge attacks only useful to break wooden shields. Just ignore them otherwise. Next we have the one-handed hammer. This is a fairly straightforward weapon, nothing quirky about any of its animations. For hordes, you're going to want to use push stab, light, light. This has great cleave, pretty good stagger, but very low damage. Hammers in general have kind of low damage in this game. Of course, they balance that with high cleave, high stagger. Go for headshots to get better damage. If you're actually out of stamina, you can go to light, light, block reset against hordes, and then once you got some stamina, go to push stab, light, light. For armor, use charge attacks. These are pretty good single target DPS and for armor and unarmored targets. If you have high health elites, charge attack spam is going to be better DPS. And for bosses, also charge attack spam. Next, we have shields. So shields are kind of bad in this game right now. They got pretty low damage overall, low mobility. They don't really make up for that in anything else. But the one thing that's kind of unique about them is they all have this bash attack. It's one of their charge attacks. For the action shield, it's the first charge attack. It's where you obviously use the shield to throw down powerful bash. It does very low damage to most things. I think it only hits maybe one target for damage, but the damage is relevant. Really, it has a lot of stagger and it has a lot of cleave in that it won't stop after a certain amount of mass. It'll just hit whatever's in front of it with a good amount of stagger. It can even stagger Chaos Warriors if they're not attacking, so it's actually pretty powerful in certain circumstances, but of course it has no extra damage, so you really have to rely on your lights or other attacks for damage. Now, because this is an action shield, you can just light attack everything. Hordes, armor, bosses, you can light spam and do okay. There's a couple optimizations I like to do for certain circumstances, and that's involving the other charge attacks. So charge 1, of course, is that bash. Charge 2 is this horizontal strike, and I like to use that with hordes. So you have to get to it from either a light 1 into charge 2 or a charge 1 into charge 2. But once you're there, light, charge, light, charge, light, charge. Now that charge attack, that horizontal, that charge 2, has more cleave than a normal axe light, more or less axe damage, a little bit less armor damage, I think. But it is kind of useful for adding a little bit of extra control to your DPS combo. So maximum DPS is going to be light spam. Maximum control is going to be charge 1 spam, or even push into charge 1. But that transitions into charge light using charge 2, which this is a little bit of a medium between stagger and control and then damage. For armor, once again, light spam is actually pretty good. Go ahead and use it all the time if you want. One optimization I like to do is go for charge 3. So charge 3 is this powerful overhead that does different damage to normal light. And then once you're there, you can light, charge, light, charge, light, charge, and you do a normal axe light and then that charge attack, which is of course an overhead. So if you can get to that point, I think that's a little bit better DPS than just light spam, but it's not so much more that you have to always go to it to be good with axe and shield. The other thing is it's kind of clumsy or cumbersome to try to get to there, because you might mess up and be like, oh no, I'm doing the wrong charge light combo. So you have to right yourself sometimes. Same goes kind of the other way. You might accidentally do the charge 3 and then you're doing charge 3 light into hordes and you're like, oh no, it's the wrong charge light combo. So that can be a little, as I said, cumbersome with the charge light combos, but if you do want to optimize your damage, those are available to you. For bosses, just use light spam. Pretty straightforward. Block and whatnot when you need to. You don't have great mobility, so don't be afraid to block when you think a dodge might be good enough. Just block in case. Next is the hammer and shield, which once again has a bash attack, but it's bash 2. So bash or charge 1 is this horizontal strike with the hammer. Charge 2 is that shield bash. For hordes, you can use light spam. You don't have any like really vertical lights. Your third one is this bit of an uppercut, which is kind of annoying. If you want to avoid that, you can do light, block reset, which honestly is not terrible with a shield because you don't really have the dodge count to keep dodge dancing with lights. Right, I'm already out. You only can dodge right when it comes back up, which is kind of doable, but it can be awkward if you have to emergency dodge again. So just block resetting to get a little bit of extra defense in between your anti-horde combo is decent. Another way to do anti-horde is just charge spam. This is lower DPS but more control. Note that your charge attack, it looks like it might be really good like against armor, against cleaving stuff, but it stops in armor. So this charge 1, I don't really like it very much. I wish they'd kind of tweak it or something. I think it might be bugged, but if there's armor, you can't really use charge attacks for DPS. So for armor, I like to do push stab spam. It's really the only attack designed to take out armor. Everything else just does terrible damage to armor, but I'll note that charge attacks do cleave armor. So if you're out of stamina, right, you have a lot of stamina, so it might take you a while, but then go to charge spam. You'll at least stagger the armor if you don't damage it. And then against bosses, it's actually kind of interesting. You want to charge attack spam. Your lights are absolute garbage against bosses, so let's go to charge attack spam. You can push stab spam. It's slightly better than charge attack spam, so then once you're out of stamina, go back to charge attack spamming. Either one is okay, just straight charge attack spamming, or push stab into charge attack spam. Now we'll move on to two-handed weapons. We'll start with the two-handed hammer. This is a bit of a staple Bardin weapon, very solid, very fundamentally sound, easy to use weapon. But there's a couple optimizations we could do with the animations, and I'll just cover those as we get to those specific animations. For hordes, charge attack spam, really straightforward. You have these nice, wide, pretty slow horizontal attacks. They don't do great damage. They only, I think, damage about 3 enemies, but they tend to actually hit and stagger a lot more in hordes. Plus, they can cleave through armor. They can actually cleave through multiple storm vermin. At least right now in live, that might change with Winds of Magic. So, use these for just to gain control of a situation. The thing is they're slow, so what I often will do if I'm pressured is push, or even double push, then go into charge attack spam. Kind of jousting in and out like this, dodge backwards if you need to, after every attack. I do not use push stabs because it doesn't really show it here, but it has pretty bad cleave. It has light attack damage model and cleave model, so which is just not enough to what's the one-handed hammer, which is very low damage and cleave limits compared to the charge attacks. So it actually, I think, ends up wasting time because you only hit like one target with the push stab, and you could just push or double push and then use that time to go into charge attacks, which I think at the end of the day will give you more control than using the push stab itself. For armor, your lights are your bread and butter armor DPS. All 3 of the lights do the same armor damage. A side note is they actually do slightly more armor damage to Chaos Warriors. As you can see, normal is 1575. Heavy armor, which is Chaos Warrior armor, it does like 20% more, 25% more, which is noticeable, I think, sometimes. A couple of things you can do is if you don't want to use that light 3, this one, because it's a horizontal and you're not going to get a headshot very easily, you can do light block reset. However, the real pro strat, or like technique, is to do QQ canceling, and a Q, of course, is the weapon swap button on controller, or on PC, keyboard rather. So what you do is you do your light QQ, swap back to your weapon, and if you do this right, you actually light attack faster than just light spamming. If you mess up like that, you actually shoot your ranged weapon, which is more costly on certain weapons like handgun with a long reload, but number of weapons with Bardin don't get punished too hard, so I think it's actually worth it with Bardin. Um, it's not necessary. I'll point that out, but it is a noticeable improvement if you can get it down. It's very hard. It might not be worth the hours it takes to master. And the real difficulty is being able to do it while dodge dancing, especially if you have to use the Q button, which of course will take a finger off of your movement keys. So it can be awkward to try to get good at. Don't bother if you don't want to, but if you're trying to find something to master, it's there. For bosses, same thing as armor. Use lights and QQ swap if you want to. I think bosses are a great place or time to practice QQ swapping because you're not usually if you're just DPSing, you're not under nearly as much pressure. You don't have to dodge dance everything. So just to get like muscle memory practice in, bosses are a great opportunity for that. Next is the Great Axe or the two-handed axe. It's interesting because it has the exact same animations as the two-handed hammer, but it has different damage models on most of those, so it ends up being a little bit different in how you use it. For hordes, once again you charge attack, but the main difference is that you have more damage and sacrifice, cleave, and stagger. You only hit 3 targets, but you'll kill those 3 targets a lot faster than you will with the two-handed hammer. So you're gonna end up needing more help to control hordes, but you'll kill the hordes faster. And to control hordes, I actually do use the push stab because it's this nice horizontal attack that has a good amount of cleave. Yes, it is light 3, but the axe light 3 has a different damage and cleave model than hammer light 3. So you can just push and push stab to get better control. For armor, lights are great, not light 3 though. So I do light block reset. And this, I think, is actually fast enough that you don't need to do QQ canceling. I think light is more or less just as fast. So I don't really QQ cancel. As you can see, I'm not great at it anyways. But with two-handed axe, it's not necessary. Let's put it that way. The other thing is your charge attacks. They do decent damage to armor. I have 10% power versus armor here. I think 19 is the base. And they do good stagger to armor, so I think charge attacks are actually worth using sometimes, at least on live right now. They might not be on Winds of Magic when that comes out, but against Storm Vermin, you can two-shot them to the body with a little bit of power versus armor, or Skaven, and you stagger them, so this is actually a really convenient two-shot. You also, I think, could do 6 shots against Chaos Warriors to the body, and you can stagger them if they're not attacking, so don't be afraid to charge attack against armor, because it can give you a little bit of extra control, but technically your best DPS is lights to the face, if you can time it right. For bosses, avoid charge attacks, just use your first 2 lights if you can. Light 3 isn't terrible against unarmored targets, it's just really bad against armor, so just don't be afraid to use light 3 against unarmored targets. And that's it. We'll move on to the Warpick. This is an interesting one. It's charge attacks have a tier system, so you do a really high amount of damage if you charge it long, or like a medium high amount of damage as a crit. That was a crit too, but there's like a tier 2 and then a tier 1. So the main difference outside of the damage, of course, or like the way you tell the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 charge attacks is there's like a bit of a hitch in your attack. So if you just do a smooth attack and then once you do that little hitch, that's when you're in the tier 2 charge attack. Once you get used to the timing, you don't really have to pay attention to the visual indicators, and really the biggest indicator is movement speed. So if I just do a normal charge attack, my movement speed is pretty even throughout, maybe even slows down at the end. If I do the tier 2, once you're into tier 2, you speed up a bit. And this is really powerful if you're like trying to snipe out armor or something from really far away. You actually can cover a huge distance, right? I started on the stairs, and during the charge attack I covered that 10 meters or something. So yeah, that charge attack it's kind of hard to use, but once you master it, you can get a lot of value out of the pick. Now for hordes, pretty simple, light spam. You've got pretty low DPS, but surprisingly good cleave and decent stagger. So you're not gonna like absolutely suffer, but it's a little bit difficult with hordes, especially because you have only one effective dodge. To improve DPS, definitely go for headshots. You can actually start hitting one-shot breakpoints with headshots, which will drastically increase your kill pressure on hordes. Now for armor, pretty self-explanatory. Go for charge attacks. But tier 1s versus tier 2s, I think it largely depends on the enemy. Tier 2s will always be good. They'll one-shot Storm Vermin to the body, and you can two-shot, body shot Chaos Warriors with the right breakpoints. Just note that your armor and your heavy armor damage, or there's Chaos Warrior damage, is the same. So you do full damage. So this damage number here is what you do to Chaos Warriors as well. And if you actually can get a crit headshot, see 95 base on a headshot for tier 2 without a crit. If you get a crit, it's like 120 something. You actually can one-shot Chaos Warriors with a tier 2 crit headshot. Of course, you can't, guarantee a crit, but going for headshots, those tier 2s on Chaos Warriors is powerful. Those tier 2s can one-shot Storm Vermin. However, if you don't want to just use tier 1s, if you're up close, you don't have the space, you can two-tap Storm Vermin with tier 1s to the body. So either of them are decent. Tier 2s, if you can manage it and master it, are great. For bosses, it doesn't matter, just go fast. Tier 1s versus tier 2s, it's not much of a damage difference. I think tier 1s are like 5% better, but if you're holding your tier 2, then you're wasting DPS. But if you're just attacking as fast as you can with charge attacks, if they're tier 1s or tier 2s, it doesn't really matter. Next, we'll move on to the dual weapons. For that, I'll actually swap to Slayer. So the first is the dual axes. These are Slayer only weapon, which is kind of unique for him. Basically, they are axes, except their lights are not super powerful. Don't just light attack everything. One note is they have movement speed kind of tricks. First is to push stab spam. A little bit faster, you have a bit of a lunge. The thing is, it eats up all your stamina, so you can only do it so often. Once you're out, you can light spam, or really light, and just use the beginning of that attack animation. So what I'm doing is light, QQ, then doing the beginning of the light, again, to get a little bit of extra movement speed. And this is what Slayers are doing if they're like weapon glitching and moving a little bit faster, is they're doing the light, QQ swapping really quickly, light, QQ swapping really quickly, with dual axes. Now for animations, for hordes, just light spam. Because these are Slayer only, you kind of have to take them in stride with the Slayer melee buffs, and there's actually got really good DPS against unarmored targets with these lights. You can get CC and attack speed with your ult, and just note that they have pretty low cleave but good damage, just like axes should. So you have to apply kill pressure to actually have good control and whatnot with hordes. But they're definitely capable of it because you're with Slayer. For armor, push stab spam is the best. Once you're out of stamina, go to charge attacks. Go for headshots, of course. Pretty straightforward. For bosses, it's actually light attack spam. Charge attacks are just kind of similar damage, but slower attacks at the end of the day. So lights are pretty solid against basically every unarmored target. Finally, we have dual hammers. These are not Slayer only. Every other class can use dual hammers, and this is the DLC weapon, by the way, from Back to Uberstrike. They're interesting because they do have a movement thing. It's also push stab. Their push stab is this awkward stab. I don't get why a hammer is stabbing, but it is like 5 to 10% faster than move speed, so potentially worth it in certain circumstances. But it doesn't. Well, it kind of does have the movement at the beginning of your attack thing too. I don't think it's always useful to do, but it's there. The other quirk about this is there's this hidden attack of sorts. So if you look at the armory mod, it says there's this light 4, which has a different damage model than the first 3 lights. But if you do your light attack pattern, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? You don't really see that light 4. So where is it? You have to do a push stab and then light. And then it does that overhead light 4, which is the same light 4 as the one-handed hammer. I think it has the same damage model as the axe lights. So it's actually not useful for hordes, which is pretty convenient because that means you can just light spam for hordes, which is pretty easily the best kind of horde control combo pretty much there is in the game right now. It doesn't have great DPS against hordes. Of course, with Slayer, your DPS against hordes is actually just solid all around. For other classes, it's not as good against hordes DPS-wise, but you're still going to output great control, great stagger. To improve your DPS, of course, go for headshots. Now for armor, there's 2 combos I like to do. The first one, push stab, light, charge attack. These are your 3 best anti-armor attacks right after one another. So it's great, I think, mostly for Storm Vermin, because if you hit everything, even if you don't get headshots, it'll one-shot Storm Vermin, or like 4-shot Storm Vermin, if all the attacks land. If you get like a headshot here or there, it can improve your kill pressure. And it's great for opening up the shields of Storm Vermin. It'll open up the guards. That'll open up the guard, and then you have your charge attack to bop him on the head right after. Now for Chaos Warriors, I don't really do that. I'll just do charge attack, block reset. Charge 1 is this double overhead. It's pretty powerful. Great single target DPS. So use that against high health elites also, like Maulers. Then for bosses, same thing. Charge, block reset. Don't use lights at all. Don't really bother with the push stab combos. They're not great, not compared to charge 1, block reset. Just keep it simple. It's pretty easy to do. And that's it. Thank you for watching.